show me any country in the world which has developed that didn't embrace science, technology and innovation.
It needs to be action. It needs to be practical.
Ndio sababu kuu ambayo inasaidia inafanya kwamba mvua isipatikane na vile vile kuacha mazingira ambayo tulikuwa tunatumia hapo kale.
Developed and developing countries are currently being affected by climate change.
Just like most of the environmental legislation that exists today, the Kenya climate change policy-making process has emanated from an international treaty process, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. The Kenya Climate Change Bill currently before Parliament is a product of multi-sectoral consultation which involves civil society led by the Kenya Climate Change Working Group, the private sector, government, communities, parliament, and academics, among others.
Here at ACT, what we focus on is basically research and policy work, because we are an international think tank working in different research areas. The policy dialogue basically was aimed at bringing policymakers, scientists, people in the technological field working on different technologies, students in universities studying about climate change issues and other related issues to climate change.
We do have an interest, in helping the discussion, helping the debate on how the country can harness science, technology, and innovation. Climate science, climate technologies, and innovation. And I should add here that innovation is not just technological, Innovation can also be in terms of policy, or managerial innovation, or organizational innovation. And one of the things that I'm particularly keen to stress is this managerial, policy, organizational, and institutional types of innovations. In particular, the ability to get the private sector, the public sector, the academic community, and the civil society to work together to harness science, technology, and innovation for adaptation to climate change.
And we look forward to the other line ministries being able to see that civil society and young people in particular do have something to contribute on the table. They are not recipients, they are providers. They're not just consumers, they're also producers. When you're talking about adopting new technology, that the young people is where you're going to get the technology coming from. Rather than also looking at innovation and creativity from countries outside the continent or outside Kenya, why don't you look within? For example, maybe just on the outside, there's an ICT policy that is being prepared. ICT is a medium that young people in particular use that on a regular basis, on a daily basis. That's everything they do. Now, if you can tap into that knowledge, and you can also find ways of unlocking the challenges of disseminating information.
So adaptation is a fairly new subject, adaptation to climate change in particular. Adapting to climatic events is very old, but adapting to human-induced climate change is a new twist. The question is, how new is this? Is it different? How do we measure it? And now that money is being poured into doing adaptation to climate change, how are we going to measure the effectiveness of that funding that is going in? And how can we enhance the effectiveness of that?
Adaptation to climate change has potentially very large impact in reducing those sort of damages, But adaptation comes at a cost. It is not free, At current levels, if we were to actually do the things we are supposed to do to begin limiting the impacts of climate change, we would be investing something like $500 million a year. By 2030, that would probably rise to $1 to $2 billion a year. That is the magnitude of what we are talking about. So it's very serious business.
Climate change is going to be a major challenge. And in that policy document, climate change is highlighted as an issue that must be tackled through cross-cutting measures. So that's the first policy document I want to refer you to, and most of you can access to it on the internet.
The implementation of the strategies operationalization of the policies, and actualization of the Climate Change Act when it comes into place is within definition of mandates by respective ministries, actors, state and non-state actors alike. So it means that once the document is there, you, as organizations, as the private sector, will identify the specific mandate areas or focal areas of your institutions, and then use the documents to implement your programs.
Since adaptation is about changing the cultural behaviors and beliefs, one of the things that we should begin to change is to reread the value society places on science and research. Scientists say climate change solution can be achieved, but it calls for the coming together of researchers, development partners, government ministries, private sectors, civil societies, and community engagement.
I think the challenge to climate change innovations mainly is funding for such innovations, because if most innovators are usually youths or young people, and you look for these young people, usually most of the time do not have enough funding or enough cash to be able to upgrade their innovations to a level where they can market it.
The draft climate change policy explicitly states in its guiding principles that adaptation will be conducted in such a way as to avoid maladaptation, and this means bringing together all fields and applications of knowledge.
We realize that Kabuto is just some few kilometers down here. The warning we were giving were not very much effective, in that the time for people to evacuate was not really there.
I want to tell you that I've been one of the key persons who has spearheaded in the 10th Parliament a law on science, technology and innovation. So we have already a law which has enshrined in our statutes science, technology and innovation. And we are just waiting for this law now to be operationalized. And we are this law puts science and technology at the center of our development process. And is in fact in this law, we worked out and put that 2.5% of our GDP should be dedicated to science, technology, and innovation. Because a country which has no capacity and capability in science, technology, and innovation cannot grow, cannot develop. So if this country has to grow, to achieve the Vision 2030, we must put science, technology, and innovation at the forefront. And that's why me personally, I would like to encourage our youth to take science and technology and let them not take the soft options of doing social sciences. Okay, social sciences are good, but we need the hard sciences to bring innovation.
But Bangladesh is extremely vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. It's a very low-lying delta, very small area, mainly agriculture, an agrarian-based economy with well over 140 million people. So very densely populated and very poor. And as I said, impacted by climate change, floods, cyclones, droughts. But because they're vulnerable, they realized that climate change was a major problem some years ago. And they've done some very innovative features like developing a climate change strategy and action plan, which is being implemented now with funding from the government of Bangladesh. They set up a climate change trust fund, which over the years has now well over $500 million spent on several hundred activities that are implemented by government agencies, non-governmental agencies, and particularly focusing on vulnerable populations and community-based adaptation. That's an area that they have developed innovative skills in.
Communities are changing, and so are technologies that have long been in use.
One of the things that probably is very key in the bill is the involvement of county engagements in the bill. When you read the bill very well, you'll notice that it is going to be implemented by the county governments. And I think this is very critical when you cascade down to the communities that actually you want to touch where it matters. We in Nairobi here can afford to come here, can afford a plate, but talk about that person in Lodwar who rarely sees organized food. You only wait for the aeroplane or a lorry which is being shot by Al-Shabaab Maybe it will come, it may not come. So we are talking about that person in the community who rarely actually gets any food on the table.
As it has been observed, the drivers of climate change are intricately related to the people's behavior. So when we're talking about adoption, we're really talking about, we require people to change their behaviors and practices. Some of the traditions, but also based on their knowledge and attitudes and understanding. And sustained community engagement needs continued and in-depth social and biological research and assessments to build trust and better understanding of social and biological dimensions, e.g. the land tenure and people's knowledge, attitudes, and practices. This is very, very critical, and we found that even the cultural aspects of the people, the way they believe and they perceive the environment, is very, very important in order to build on the adaptation mechanisms.
Evidence-based policymaking requires that communities are part of a process to determine exactly what works, thus local and indigenous knowledge cannot be ignored. The country is littered with examples of how communities are adapting to climate change with their own local technology.
In as much as climate change is a global issue, but adaptation is local. And therefore, utilizing community-based adaptation and actually making that become the norm rather than the exception is the first step towards building community capacity and empowering them to unleash the potential that lies in these communities.
Najua mazingira ya nchi yanasababishwa na uharibifu wa misitu na kadhalika. Ndio sababu kuu ambayo inafanya kwamba mvua isipatikane na vile vile kuacha mazingira ambayo tulikuwa tunatumia hapo kale. Sasa kutokana na mtazamo huo ndio maana kwamba hali ya hewa imebadilika na kweli imefikia mahala kwamba tuko katika nafasi mbaya kabisa kimaendeleo na katika mazingira na hali ya kiuchumi. Kwa hiyo hicho ndio sababu inatufanyia mpaka tufike sasa kiangazi haeleweki wala majira ya masika hayafahamiki. Kwa hiyo tunakwenda zigizaga tu kutokana na hali ya tumepoteza mwelekeo sasa.
Sasa sisi Wamasai na shida moja na ukame sana huko nyumbani, hamna malisho nzuri ya ng'ombe, miti na katya. Sasa lakini wakati kama mvua inanyesha inakuwa nzuri, hali ya hewa inakuwa nzuri, ng'ombe na shiba, watu napata maziwa, watu napata mazao nyingi sana. Na sisi Wamasai ndio mila yetu, hata kuchunga ng'ombe porini na kunywa damu ya ng'ombe na changanya na maziwa. Sisi Wamasai hailimi, yani ufugaji wetu na usa maziwa tu, naenda kusa ng'ombe. Sasa ndio mila yetu ndio nafanya hivi.
We have moved from what used to be a very analytical form of research, which we looked at initially the impacts of climate change using top-down models. We then worked on the second, if you like, generation of research was a more bottom-up vulnerability-based analysis. So from a top-down perspective, Bangladesh and Netherlands look the same. The low-lying deltaic countries, they should be both vulnerable. But when you go and visit those two countries, they're very different. The Netherlands has technology, they can protect themselves, Bangladesh can't. So the vulnerability also matters in terms of how they are going to be facing these problems. When we move into adaptation, we are in a post-analytical phase. Adaptation is no more analysis, it is doing. You have to do something, you have to learn from doing it, then you have to do something else, and you learn from doing that, and you go up a ladder of learning as you go up, and that's what we're doing at the moment. Now, why I say the South is ahead of the North is still studying the problem. We are solving the problems. We are sitting on the problem. They don't sit on the problem. They will get it tomorrow, but we are getting it today. And so this is a resource for us in terms of how do we learn. But we have to have a learning process built into it. It won't happen automatically. We can do things, but if we don't systematically learn from our doing, then we'll keep repeating the same thing. What we have right now in terms of monitoring adaptation is a very top-down, donor-driven agenda. It is, tell me what I am buying with my dollar. All right? You are taking my dollar to do adaptation. Now you have to prove to me what you're doing with that dollar. It's a very value-for-money paradigm. In the community-based adaptation field, with empowering vulnerable people, we don't talk about money. It's about how they are empowered. In fact, they ask the opposite question. They ask the question to the North, to the polluters, what the hell are you doing to help us from the problem that you created and we are now having to suffer? It's a very different paradigm and a different question of indicators of what is successful adaptation. It is the polluter having to help the victims of pollution. And that's the kind of thing that we will be challenging in the conference in April.
The bill and draft policy put counties at the center of climate change responses, but the very fact that laws, policies, and action plans on climate change will be formulated and implemented at the county level.
The devolution of climate change to the counties is a constitutional requirement because response to climate change involves management of natural resources, management of production inputs, and all this is the mandate of the counties. Number two, we just appreciated that climate change is complex and response to it from an environment point of view, from a social point of view, from a development point of view requires action at the county level. So actually it is just a logical flaw that we have devolved the actions on climate change to the county levels.
To say that counties need to come up with a mechanism for mobilizing resources. And as far as this one is concerned, I can say that counties have started. Isiolo County has decided and is currently implementing what they are calling Isiolo County Adaptation Fund. This fund was designed, first of all, it was initially capitalized by the UK Department for International Development. And with the technical assistance of the International Institute for Environment and Development, Kenya, Kenya Meteorological Department, and other stakeholders.
Among the highlights of the Kenya Climate Change Bill is Kenya will finally have a much-needed legal and institutional framework for adaptation and mitigation to the effects of climate change. Evidence-based policy making requires that communities are part of a process to determine exactly what works, thus local and indigenous knowledge cannot be ignored.
We all know that there are things we used to do in a different way. There are new technologies for the people in agriculture now. They are not actually plowing, open plowing, as we used to do. There is that climate smart agriculture. These are issues that we are now turning around the way we used to do things.
I want to just mention that it's a long journey when it comes to looking at innovations and especially STI or science, technology and innovation in terms of climate change. What the bill, the Mheshimiwa talked earlier about, it has recognized that development or climate change is not a factor of environment. It's actually a developmental issue. And when it comes to development, you are looking at the product output to outcome.
In my view, we have to change the model from intervention to business. And I think it's coming through. The business opportunities presented by climate change are enormous. They can drive this country to the next level. And you find that entities like Climate Innovation Center have got these startup and incubation opportunities. So identify an adaptation, innovation or technology, translate it into a business model.
Expand the community-based adaptation that is taking place at the bottom-up level into a national scaled-up exercise.
We have been, for lack of a better word, very uncreative, I think, in the way we engage not just the policymakers, but also the private sector and communities as well. So we need to find innovative ways of speaking and reaching out to those various groups.
Climate change is here with us and will remain with us for a long time to come. So we have to prepare to live with it. It has challenges, but it has also a lot of opportunities, and it will change the way we are going to live in the future.